So this chapter, chapter 11, is possibly one of the more challenging chapters of the Tanya. So let's try to do this together. In chapter 9, the Alter Rebbe described for us the great battle that goes on within every single person. It's the battle between the godly soul and the animal, bestial soul, each one trying to overtake the territory of our body and ensure that we live in according with their desires and their agenda. In chapter 10, the Alter Rebbe told us about the two levels of the tzaddik, the righteous person. The righteous person, truly spiritually righteous person, is one who's become overtaken, consumed by their godly soul. And all of their life and behaviors and functions are in accordance with the godly soul. That being said, there were two categories, two classifications of the tzaddik. The tzaddik v'tovlo, there's only good within that person, which means that tzaddik has 100% eradicated the animal, bestial soul within. There's no impulse, there's no desire, there's no influence at all within that person other than the godly soul. And the tzaddik veralo, which is the tzaddik, there's a trace of the animal soul that remains within a person, sometimes consciously or subconsciously. And there were many, many levels of differences within that category of the tzaddik. Well, on the flip side, on the other extreme, there were also the two categories of a rasha. Normally, we translate the rasha as a wicked person. And when you think about a wicked person, you're thinking about a serial killer, a lawbreaker, somebody who's the scum of society. Now, of course, that person is a wicked person. But in today's chapter, we're going to be presented with a different model of who a wicked person could be. A wicked person, and we're going to redefine the translation, therefore, is not just a serial killer, but wickedness, or rasha, ra, bad, is anything, as we have studied, which is the opposite of good, the opposite of holiness, which means anything that is not subservient towards advancing the will, the desire of God, of the Torah, of mitzvot, falls short, is on the side of impurity, the other side of holiness. And that's the state of being a rasha. So it may help to redefine the rasha not so much as a wicked person, but any person that really falls short of God's calling to them in life. And there are two categories of this rasha which mirror the two categories of the tzaddik. There is the rasha v'tovlo, the wicked person, the person who falls short, but v'tovlo, there is still good. There's a strong consciousness of goodness of the godly soul within them. And there could be many levels of that classification, just like on the flip side, in the tzaddik who has some bad in him, there are many levels. For example, there could be qualitative differences on the nature, the kind of, the trace of the godly soul that remains within this person that falls short of doing what God wants from them. So even though this person falls trap to the desires, the impulses of the animal soul, however, the godly soul still is very prevalent and present within that person. Perhaps it's from the element of fire or wind or of earth, as we've discussed, and also a qualitative difference, meaning how much of the godly soul still remains, how much of it has become subservient and subordinate to the desires of the animal soul. So, for example, let's flesh this out. It could be that a person falls short and performs a sin, very minor kind of sin. And it could be very rare, only on occasion. And it could be a kind of sin that doesn't overtake the entire persona of a person, but it affects a small part of the person. So that would mean that their godly soul only becomes subservient to their animal soul in a very small way. And that person generally is doing what they should be doing and living as they should, but on occasion falling trapped to the animal soul. For example, in the realm of action, maybe they perform a minor sin, a small act of theft, a small act of deceit, a little minor negligence of the Shabbat day or of prayer, of wearing tefillin, or they could have been more helpful to somebody else, or they could have given charity and they chose to turn a blind eye and not step up where they could have helped. A small violation. in the act of, in the realm of action, one's behavior, or maybe in the realm of one's speech, one's words, where they use their words to shame somebody, to scoff, to mock somebody, to slander, and maybe very rarely they do that. Or in the realm of thought, maybe they use their thoughts to think about something immoral, something inappropriate, something forbidden. They're thinking about the performance of sin. And actually, the Alter Rebbe lays down something very powerful here, which is really rooted in the Talmud, and that is that the Talmud teaches thoughts about sin can be even worse than the actual performance of sin. Normally we think, just because I thought about doing something wrong, but I didn't actually do it, so it's okay, it's not as bad. So in a court of law, you're right. In the court of law, you only thought about sin, but you didn't actually perform the sin, okay. But with regards to one's spiritual status, how it influences your spiritual standing, the performance of a sin affects your organs, affects your hands, your feet, whatever you use to sin. The thoughts about a sin affect and they stain and they cause an impurity in your mind. Staining the mind is much more influential in a negative way versus just staining your hands, your organs, and your feet. So thoughts of sin could be worse than the actual performance of sin. And there are two realms, two kinds of thoughts of sin, which the Alter Rebbe here describes that people are very challenged by and need to work much harder on controlling themselves. One is the thought about forbidden, inappropriate sexual behaviors or sexual ideas. And that's something that people are challenged with a lot, as the Talmud says, but you don't need the Talmud to tell you that that's what we see in reality. And the other big challenge is when a person has the time and the availability and the opportunity to spend free time in studying Torah, doing something purposeful in that regard. And instead, they choose their time, maybe it's at night, at nighttime, and the house is quiet, and you could be engaged in studying Torah, which you're supposed to be, that's the mitzvah, and instead you turn your heart and your mind to something frivolous and empty and waste of time and inappropriate. So those are two areas of thought activity which require a lot of guarding and protection. So this is the category of the Rasha v'Tovlo, the Rasha who the good within him is very prevalent, very strong, and only on small occasion might they perform a small category of sin. Then there may be quantitatively something very different, where a person is overtaken by their animal soul in a much stronger way. So maybe it's more common, more often, not just once in a while, but every day, several times a day. And the kind of sin they're engaged in is a much more severe kind of sin, which is truly terribly forbidden, and it's a gross violation of the Torah. So again, those are the different levels, the many different kinds of levels of this Rasha, where the good consciousness and influence of the godly soul remains, but can be hijacked and subservient to the animal soul. This kind of Rasha, this kind of wicked person, the person who falls short, of course, they're not a complete Rasha. They still have their consciousness of the godly soul within them. But there is, in fact, a yardstick how to know that this person has not fallen completely off the deep end, and they haven't become totally converted to the side of evil and bad. What is that? Because such a person, after they sin, they experience remorse and regret for what they did wrong. The fact is that the presence of their godly soul and consciousness still remains within them. A little more, a little less, stronger, weaker, but it's there. And so if ever a person does something wrong, thinks something wrong, says something wrong, and maybe at the time that they did it, it could be very conscious, it could be very deliberate, they desired to do that. But at the end of the day, they're going to catch a grip of themselves and really have a feeling of regret. They did something wrong. It wasn't nice of them. It was unhealthy for them. It was harmful to another. And that regret and remorse when we do something wrong, that's a healthy sign. That tells you that no matter how far you've may fall astray, your godly soul is still very strong, working within you. So the Talmud says, "Risha'im meleim charatot." Wicked people are full of regret. And this is the kind of wicked person that still has a very strong presence of the godly soul within them. It's like a story of a chassid who once came to the Tzemach Tzedek, the third Chabad Rebbe, with a big complaint, with a big weight on his shoulder, on his chest. He said, "The Rebbe, you have to help me. I'm suffering." So the Rebbe said, "What's wrong?" He said, "The Rebbe, I'm having all these thoughts of doubt. I don't believe in God anymore." So the Rebbe said, "No, and what's so bad?" He said, "The Rebbe, but what do you mean? There's a God in the world." So the Rebbe responded, "It's okay. You're fine. You can go home now." In other words, yeah, we fall short and we have all these thoughts or behaviors of doubt or of negligence from the Torah. But as long as on occasion, we always come back with a strong thought, healthy consciousness of remorse, regret, that means that you haven't fallen off the deep end. You still have a healthy, godly soul within you. Now, in the last part of this chapter, the Alter Rebbe says there is the lowest category of this Rasha, this wicked person, which is the person that has completely become consumed and overtaken by their animal, bestial soul. And there seems to be no trace anymore of their godly soul. And that's a person who dedicates their life to sin, to negligent behavior, inappropriate behavior, without any remorse, without any regret. They just are passionate and excited and enthused by doing things that are against the Torah all the time, and it doesn't come hard to them, it comes easy. They've totally dedicated their life to living this very sinful life. That's the complete Rasha. Now, that's the real person who has strayed completely from the path of Torah and mitzvot without any regret or remorse. They've lost all consciousness of the godly soul. That being said, the Alter Rebbe says, here's a difference between the complete Rasha and the complete Tzaddik. The complete Tzaddik has completely eradicated the animal soul from within. There's no trace of it whatsoever. They are purely 100% good and holy. The complete Rasha seems to have eradicated any trace of the godly soul within. However, it's not entirely true. There's no conscious state of the godly soul within them. However, the godly soul still remains a part of them, at least in a subconscious way, in a way as the Tanya calls makif. It surrounds over them. It hovers over them in a very aloof state. It's always there. You cannot ever completely eliminate the godly soul within you. And therefore, the Alter Rebbe concludes this chapter with a very profound teaching of the Zohar. The Zohar says that we know that to have a prayer minyan, you have to bring 10 people together. 10 people together isn't just, an extra quantitative state of people, of godly souls, of holiness, like you have 3, then you have 4, then you have 5, and then you have 6, and having 6 godly souls together is more than 3. But when it goes from 9 to 10, it's a qualitative difference. The presence of 10 people together achieves a completely new realm of the presence of the Shekhinah, of God's presence within that group, which is why the prayers of the group of the minyan, the 10 people, is so differently effective than just 9 or 8 people. Well, the Alter Rebbe says, what if you would gather a room of these 10 people, but they were 10 Risha'im Gumorim, 10 completely wicked people, 10 people who have lost any vestige of any consciousness of their godly soul. Still, the Zohar says, you can make a minyan, you can pray. The Shekhinah, God's presence, resides over there. Over there among the 10 wicked people, yes, because you can never completely eliminate your godly soul. It's there, even in a very subconscious and aloof way, which is a redeeming factor. No person can ever fall off the wayside and never come back. So there's a story about a chassid who asked the Tzemach Tzedek, again the third Chabad Rebbe, a question in the Megillah of Purim, the Purim story. We talk a lot about the Yehudim, the Jewish people. The way you spell Yehudim, Yud, Hey, Vav, Daled, Yud, Mem. But in the Megillah, when it talks about the decree of Haman and Achashverosh against the Jewish people, it spells Yehudim with an extra Yud. Yud, Hey, Vav, Daled, Yud, Yud, Mem. Why the 2 Yuds? So the Tzemach Tzedek answered, Yud is 10. That's the numerical value. Haman's decree against the Jewish people was not just against the righteous tzaddikim, the holy Jewish people, that all they had was one godly soul within them, just the 10 faculties of the godly soul. but it was also against the Jews that were not so righteous, that were not tzaddikim, and they had 20 faculties within them, a yud and a yud, 2 yuds, 2 times 10, the 10 faculties of the godly soul, and the very present 10 faculties of the animal soul within them. Haman's decree, like the decree of many anti-Semites and tyrants throughout Jewish history, was against all Jewish people, no matter how righteous or not righteous you are. Later, the Megillah continues to use the 2 yuds even after the salvation came to the Jewish people. So the Tzemach Tzedek responded, because later, after those not such righteous Jewish people saw the miracle salvation of the hand of God, they did teshuvah, they repented and became like the tzaddik. And then the 2 yuds, in Hebrew you say yud, but in Yiddish you could pronounce it a yid, a yud and a yid in one of the pronunciations. A yid means a Jew. These 2 yidden became equals. A yid is a yid, no matter if it's the completely righteous tzaddik or if it's the completely unholy rasha, the person who falls short of any kind of calling from God. A yid is a yid. A yid is always equal. Therefore, there's 2 yuds to represent the equality of every single Jewish person, that God's presence will reside wherever a Jewish person is. This concludes the classification, the explanation about the rasha. So we've learned about the holy tzaddik, the righteous person, never falls short of God's will. The rasha is somebody who either always or very rarely will engage in sin. So then what's the Benoni? What's this middle level? If you never fall short, you never sin, you're the righteous tzaddik. If you even sin once or on occasion, and you'll regret after and do teshuvah, then you're the rasha. When are you the Benoni? And that's the next chapter, chapter 12, which is what the Tanya is really dedicated towards describing who is the Benoni. Have a great day. God bless you.